Today I'm going to do this video from a brand new park that we have up here in North Beach, and this whole area was just completely redone. And then right behind me here on the other side of this park you have multi-million-dollar mansions that are actually right on the beach. This is the only area in all of Miami Beach where you can actually buy a single family home like this on the ocean, because right over there is the Atlantic Ocean. So we'll check out this park, we'll look at the ocean, and just hang out around here today. So let's talk about how the housing affordability crisis has now gone global. And I'm not really shocked to hear this, and probably a lot of you guys aren't either. However, it's important to pay attention to, because what's happening across the world right now is, I think, a very dangerous situation, in the sense that people just can't afford to live and pay for regular places anymore. I mean, look at this. To buy a 650 square foot apartment in the rest of the world, for you international viewers, that's a 60 square meter apartment. So pretty average size one bedroom here in the US, and probably a lot of other places too. To buy something like that now is financially out of reach for regular average skilled workers across the world, meaning people that work regular jobs. We're not talking white collar jobs that get paid large salaries and things like that. We're talking just regular people, probably people that work at the stores, the restaurants, factories, bus drivers, the people that we need to make the world go round, essentially. And this was cited by the Global Real Estate Bubble Index. That's actually a thing, guys, which is published by the Swiss investment bank UBS. Okay, so they're the ones who are putting these figures together. They track about 25 cities worldwide, and in all of these 25 cities, mortgage rates have doubled. So this is not something that's exclusive to the US. This whole housing crisis, from affordability to mortgages, from home price affordability, has gone global, guys. And this pandemic just turned everything completely upside down, because before this, places had their affordability problems, certain areas did, but things were in much better shape before this whole global pandemic happened. I think we can all agree with that much. And so basically the math comes down to this. Skilled service workers now can afford 1/3 less housing than before the pandemic, essentially. And one thing that this home bubble index is looking at, in some of the biggest bubble risk zones, different cities in the world that are the most overvalued, home prices in these areas have gone up about 60% since the whole run-up during the pandemic. And relative to the home prices going up 60%, people's incomes have only gone up 12%, guys. And these figures are adjusted for inflation. So, you know, how can the regular person afford to pay 60% more when they're only making 12% more? They cannot. And this is the dynamic that I've been hitting over and over again on this channel, because for people to be able to afford to live somewhere, they need to be able to make the payment. And if they can't make the payment, they can't live there. It's really that simple. Well, we know that interest rates are pretty high and are going to remain high for quite some time. We know that much. And so the question is, how do we get out of this situation? You know, how do home prices come back to earth? How does affordability recover, essentially? And the answer is that home prices have to come down, guys. Or the other option that could be a possibility, which I think is far less likely, is that workers' wages need to go up by 50 or 60% to account for this huge run-up in prices. So we know that that's pretty much never going to happen. If anybody's ever gotten a 50 or 60% raise in 1 year, let me know. I mean, I'm talking about staying at the same company and not switching jobs, of course. So if you've ever gotten something like that, let me know. I've never heard of anybody getting such a raise ever, and that's why I think that's not very realistic. But what is realistic is home prices coming back down to reality to meet what people can afford, because that just seems to be the path of least resistance, right? I mean, that can fix this thing overnight, essentially. If home prices are at rates that people can afford, even with high interest rates, then it still makes sense to buy, which obviously it doesn't so much right now. And that's why we're seeing home prices and the amount of closed sales go down. This is the other side of this park over here. They got bathrooms over there, this new playground for the kids. They got volleyball, little workout area here, and it's all right next to the beach, guys. So we're gonna walk over there in just a second. Got homeless that hang out in the park too. Of course, that's always a thing here. But at least it's not like Venice Beach or anything where we have, you know, rows of tents. And I know they cleaned that up, but that was pretty bad for a while, and they just moved the tents a couple blocks off the beach. So, you know, it's still in the area. Luckily, we don't have anything like that here. Now, among some of the international cities that are on this list that are in the biggest bubble territory are places like Toronto, Canada, Frankfurt, Germany. These places are pretty much at the largest risk of seeing the biggest home price declines due to the massive bubble that these places saw during the run-up. And in some of the other places where the risk is still high but not quite as bad are places like Zurich, Switzerland, Hong Kong, China, Munich, Germany, also Tel Aviv in Israel is on this list. So all of these places could be seeing big corrections in the near future because they just haven't been able to keep up, guys. You know, the wages, like we talked about, the wages are not keeping up with the cost of living and the cost of homes in these different cities. And the other thing that we're seeing from this is the amount of outstanding mortgages is going up in all of these areas. Every single area that's being tracked on this bubble list are seeing more defaults, more people not being able to make the payments anymore, because when you go into these real estate bubbles, this is usually the next thing that we see happen. We see home prices come down. We see people defaulting on mortgages as the layoffs start picking up all across the world. You know, it's not just in the US. I'm sure these guys are having layoffs in their countries as well, because this recession is global, guys. This is not, you know, a unique situation to the US. This is happening basically everywhere. And I really got a kick out of this because here's what they say in this report, is that housing is relatively affordable in Miami, Madrid, Dubai, San Francisco, and Boston. And it says this limits the risk of a price correction in these cities because the wages are more connected to reality in these places. And I mean, those are some of the most expensive areas I've ever heard of, guys. Dubai, Miami, you know, San Francisco is like one of the most expensive housing markets in the entire country, yet they're saying that these places are at the lowest risk of having corrections, which I don't necessarily believe that. If we can even look at San Francisco. I think that market has seen bigger price declines in the past few months than any other market in the US. To say that incomes in these areas are more attached to reality, I don't know if I really believe that. And as a Miami local, I think it could be true here, but what they're probably doing in saying that places like this are less at risk, they're taking into consideration the incomes of all the new people that have moved in here and bought real estate here and, you know, are now living here versus the people that were living here and what the average person was making before the pandemic boom. So I think that's what they're looking at and basing their predictions on the fact that, okay, well, you had a bunch of high income earners move into places like Miami and Boston and San Francisco, whatever, and that's why they're not as high of a risk. But I don't necessarily agree with that. Even in high income areas like this, guys, people can still get in trouble because you always got to remember the golden rule of money, and that is the more people earn, the more they will spend. And that's true across the world, and it's no different in places here like in Miami. You see everybody driving their Lambos and Ferraris down the street. That costs money, guys. You know, it's money that you're not spending on your house. It's money that you're not using to pay off other bills and debts, and who knows if they can even afford this stuff. I'm gonna get off the beach because it's pretty windy out here, and I'm gonna show you kind of all these houses that are on the sand over here. This bubble index says here's a few things you can look out for in your local market to determine if your area is in a bubble, because obviously not every city in the world is on this list. So you can look for things like a decoupling of home prices compared to local wages. Are the wages detached from reality? And honestly, guys, I think most of Florida is in this situation right now. Florida's home prices do not match up with what people can earn here. Our rents also detached from what people can afford. That's another big indicator, as well as things like excessive lending and excessive construction going on. If you see all this happening, then there's a good chance that your area is in a bubble. So keep these things in mind if you are looking at buying real estate right now, and try to protect yourself and make sure you don't buy in an area where the bubble's about to burst. You see, we got the beach right over there, and we got the boardwalk, and all these houses right back here, all oceanfront. There's nowhere else in Miami you can buy homes that are literally on the beach like this, so it makes them pretty unique. There's another interesting story today about how the housing crash is going to hurt baby boomers just as much as it's going to hurt millennials, because right now millennials are feeling the biggest crunch from the home prices going up to these insane levels, along with the high interest rates now. And when you combine that with the fact that a lot of millennials are now at home buying age, starting families, things like this, trying to get into a home, it's basically more difficult now than ever before. And a lot of people can say, well, the baby boomers had it great. You know, they got in at these ultra low prices, and you know, they got it when the getting was good. Their homes are paid off. They don't have to worry about any of this. That's not really true. And we'll get into that in a moment. But one thing that's interesting that they say in this article is that home prices by nature are prone to booms and busts, because the housing supply and demand dynamic can never really be fully balanced. Because when you look at how long it takes to build the average home, and you know, people want to move into the home yesterday, it's very tough for demand and supply to be at an equilibrium pretty much ever. So it's a natural cycle of housing to see these booms and busts. But one thing that they say is how the government makes things so much worse. You know, you have the Fed, which is not part of the government, by the way, guys, but the Fed obviously has the biggest influence over all of this with their interest rate hikes, or whenever they lower interest rates. When rates are down, home prices go up because everyone can afford to buy, so it drives up the price. When rates are high, like they are now, it drives prices down because no one can afford to buy. And so the Fed has the most power over all of this. The government also makes zoning laws, and they also do things like determine the amount of affordable housing grants available, things like this that can also influence the cost of housing as well. And now the big concern is the fact that we have all these millennials that bought homes in the past couple of years, and like we talked about, anybody who bought in the past couple of years is at the biggest risk right now of going underwater on their mortgage. And I'm not going to get into all that of what it means, but basically the short version is your home is now worth less than what you owe, essentially, guys. And the reason for that is because when you buy at all-time high prices and the prices start coming down like they are now, and you combine that with the fact that most people put down low down payments to get into the home, you don't have any equity. And so now you're in a situation where the house is worth less than what you owe on it. And this is the same dynamic at play that happened to Gen Xers during the last housing crash of 2008. They were at the same stage in life as millennials are right now, you know, getting married, starting to have kids, you know, wanting to start a family, and they just happened to be in this buying cycle of basically one of the worst times ever to buy a house. And a lot of these people got royally screwed, even more so last time when you look at the amount of terrible loans that were made and the predatory lending that was going on, basically taking advantage of people and allowing people to buy homes that otherwise should not be buying. But one thing I disagree with is this article says, oh, these people did nothing wrong, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, they happened to be starting a new chapter in their life and bought a home at the worst time possible, but it's not their fault. Well, it is their fault, guys, because obviously we didn't have, you know, the resources that we have now with YouTube and channels like mine around back then in order to inform people about what's happening. But when you're making the largest decision essentially of your entire life, I think it's extremely important to be paying attention to what's happening in the world around you and the economy and your local housing market. And I think a lot of people back then were much more unaware of the situation than today. because of things like social media, and we have all these amazing resources and websites that we can look at now to determine where the housing market is at, versus back then the resources were a lot more limited. But these Gen Xers got in big trouble, guys. A lot of these people that got laid off during the last Great Recession, and they started missing their mortgage payments, not only did they lose their homes in foreclosure, but it basically set them back financially like an entire decade. So a lot of these Gen Xers now are on the same playing field as millennials, and I think that's also part of the reason why we see so much demand, more than ever before, because you basically have demand coming from every which way possible. You have demand from millennials, who are basically the biggest generation in US history besides the baby boomers. And then you have Gen Xers that got messed up during the last crash and looking to get back in finally now that they've recovered financially. You have foreigners that come here from all over the world and buy up our real estate in the US as well. So every which way you look, there's people looking to buy a house here. And when you combine that level of demand, which is insane, with ultra low interest rates and pretty fair pricing like we saw pre-pandemic, it's no wonder that we ended up in the situation that we're in right now. But let's get back into the situation of how this housing crash can also hurt baby boomers. Because as the housing bust starts happening, first thing that starts happening, the economy starts shrinking, guys. Less people are buying less things because they just can't afford it. That makes sense. What's really alarming is a lot of people in the baby boomer generation have their house as their largest asset, which is even larger than their retirement funds that are in their 401ks or their investment accounts in the stock market. Usually people in this age group, their home is their largest asset, and that's assuming they don't have a ton of debt on it either. That's assuming they didn't take the HELOC loans recently. That's assuming that they don't have a second mortgage on the property, and assuming they paid off the first mortgage. So that's the other thing, okay? And the problem is, now that a lot of these people are getting older and could be in a situation where they need to sell, what's happening is they are looking at possibly selling at one of the worst times ever as prices start coming down and they need the money the most. That's when they could be looking at selling their property over the next few years. And so they are set to get hit financially from this as well, because when you're having medical troubles or financial troubles and you're 70 years old, probably the first thing you're going to be looking at is liquidating all your investment accounts. And once that's dried up, or even if you have any of those, the next thing to go is the house, guys. And so that's where they're saying that people who are in the baby boomer generation could get just as screwed over from this crash as everybody else. And I think that can definitely come true, especially people who are struggling in retirement or have unexpected health issues that come up. So what a lot of this comes down to is just timing. You know, a lot of it could just be bad timing for people who need to sell in the next few years. The one good thing is that will probably benefit the millennials who are going to be out there looking to buy those homes, but that's not going to be much help to them either if they're unemployed and don't have a way to afford the home. So let's see how all this is going to play out. It's going to be interesting to see where this market goes. You know, every week I'm reading these stories about how all of this could play out, and I understand that a lot of this is what ifs and hypothetical, and I think it's good to discuss it, you know, because as we discuss it, we all get a little bit smarter. It makes you see things from a different perspective that maybe you haven't seen it from before, including myself. I learned from making these videos as well, and I know a lot of you guys get some good value from it too. But what it all comes down to is, if we all want to have a better future for real estate when it comes to everybody being able to afford a home, these huge boom and bust cycles like we just saw during the pandemic are horrible for housing affordability and for people to be able to have stability in life. As millennials get older and also the Gen Z comes up behind us, you know, it's important for us as we get into government and politics and start becoming the ones making these laws to not follow in the footsteps that basically led us to where we're at right now. Because one of the top priorities going into the future should be finding ways to stabilize the cost of living, especially when it comes to housing, because this is basically the most expensive thing that people have to pay for out of their monthly budget. So if we can get that under control, you can basically improve the quality of life for pretty much everyone. Oh, and by the way, guys, remember that company Open Door? Yeah, well, one of my channel members, Nicholas, he sent me this story, which I just had to share with you guys. These guys are going through a class action lawsuit now. Oh, big surprise. First, you see their earnings drop to the floor a couple months ago. Then they announced layoffs about a week or two ago. And now they're going through a class action lawsuit. And let's take a look at, real quick, why these guys are going through this lawsuit. Here's what the allegations are, and I'm going to read this to you guys so I don't get it wrong. The complaint alleges that during the class period, defendants issued materially false or misleading statements and or failed to disclose that the algorithm used by the company to make offers for homes could not accurately adjust to changing house prices across different market conditions and economic cycles. Okay? So first of all, that basically means these guys have no idea what they're doing, and their complete algorithm and system for buying homes was totally flawed. Guys, it means that they have no idea what they're doing. That's what this means. Their algorithm wasn't smart enough to figure out what's going on with the market. Which, big surprise, right? The computer can't figure everything out. You need to have smart people that can figure these things out, who've been around the block and have seen this stuff before. Not some program that was made a couple years ago. And so the rest of it says, this put the company at an increased risk of sustaining significant and repeated losses due to residential real estate pricing fluctuations, and accordingly defendants overstated the purported benefits and competitive advantages of the algorithm. As a result, documents issued in connection with the merger between the company and Open Door Labs Inc. and defendants' public statements throughout the class period were materially false and or misleading and failed to state information required to be stated therein. So this is pretty similar to the FTX scandal in that these guys lied. They said that they were doing all these things with the money and going to make everybody rich through crypto. Didn't happen. And these guys are obviously getting sued left and right, and people who invested in FTX are getting sued left and right. And now you're seeing the same thing happen with Open Door. And if you are a shareholder in Open Door, guys, check out the link in the description at the bottom where I put all the articles mentioned. You are entitled to a chunk of the winnings from this lawsuit, because I've signed up for things like this before. There was one with Apple a few years ago when they were throttling older iPhones in order to, get people to buy new ones, and different things that companies do. And then you have these class action lawsuits. So if you are or ever were a shareholder in Open Door, make sure you check out that link and register for it, so that way you get your fair share of the pie once these people get sued and probably go bankrupt. And by the way, guys, real quick on FTX, they're supposed to have $5 billion worth of crypto in their accounts right now. They only have $659,000. That just goes to show you the level of thievery and fraud that's going on with different places. One of them being Open Door, another one FTX. Who knows who it's going to be next week. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I publish a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next video on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.